Okay, so my notes in this unit will be color-coded. Red, if it's in red, it's vocabulary. If it's purple, you need to write it down, and black is just what we're going to talk about. You don't need to know that for the test, but I would still like you to take in that information. You just don't need to study it for the test. So why is vocab so important? This unit has a lot of vocabulary, and that's what's going to help you the most on the test, is learning your vocabulary and being able to understand what the question is asking you. Alright, so here are some lovely pictures of why we have an immune system. In the eye here, this is a little worm that the arrow is pointing to. He has a worm in his eye. This picture on the left, that's an extremely blown up picture of, they zoomed in on it really far. It's a worm, parasitic worm, obviously. It's got lots of little suckers and mouths to chew on you with. Down here, the green rods, that's bacteria, the shape bacilli, and the green circles, those are viruses. You can see the pokey things, the glycoproteins sticking out of the outside. If you'll remember in the last unit, we talked about the lytic and lysogenic cycles. So over here, you have, down in the bottom corner, you have a cell, and you just see a couple of little black specks. Those are the viruses. And then the lytic cycle, it's going to multiply and multiply and multiply, and that's when you get the picture next to it. So all of those little black dots are viruses, and that cell is getting ready to lyse or burst open and spread all those viruses to all the other cells in our body. So you can see why it's such a big deal that we have an immune system to fight this. So, immune system, that's the name of our unit, and the definition of the immune system is our body's system of defense against agents which cause disease. And agents which cause disease, those are pathogens. Most everything is covered with pathogens. Remember our shoes, what we did in class, we used tape to pull the bacteria off the bottom of our shoes, and then we grew it on the agar plates. So, if everything that we touch is covered with pathogens, and then we stick our hands in our mouths, we shake hands, we do all sorts of stuff, why are we not constantly sick? That is due to our immune system, obviously, what we're talking about. So now we're going to talk about the 3 different points in the immune system. Alright, so we have the lymphatic system, innate immunity, and adaptive immunity. So this first section, we're just talking about the lymphatic system. So it's involved in both innate and adaptive immunity. It consists of branching networks of vessels and numerous lymph nodes. So while we're talking about this, we're going to call the lymph vessels highways and the lymph nodes motels or hotels, whichever you prefer. So the lymphatic system, if an infectious agent gets into the body, it usually heads straight for the circulatory system. So that's where the blood is, and our heart pumps blood to our whole body. It takes half a second from the blood to pump from your heart to the tips of your fingers, and half a second to go back, and 1 full second to go from your heart to the tips of your toes. So in a max of 2 seconds, your blood has replenished the blood in all of your body. It's pumped back and forth once. So if a pathogen gets in your body, that's where it's going to want to head first, because that's where it's going to have the most access to the rest of your body. So the lymphatic system is going to be there, so once the pathogen is in your circulatory system, the lymphatic system is going to do its best to filter it out. So the lymphatic system has 2 main functions. It's going to return the filtered fluid back to the circulatory system, and it fights infection. So, the lymphatic system. Obviously, you've already written the top definition down, so you don't need to write that again. But we talked about how it's consisting of branching networks of vessels and numerous lymph nodes. Our vessels were the highways, and our lymph nodes were the hotels. Lymph nodes are little round organs packed with macrophages and lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are just specialized white blood cells. Macrophages are a type of phagocyte, so the cells that just run around your body eating anything that they can find. That's a macrophage, a type of phagocyte. So if you feel on the side of your neck, when you go to the doctor and you don't feel good and he comes at you looking like he's about to choke you, he's actually going for the lymph nodes in your throat. If they're all swollen and sore, it means you're probably sick with something. So these vessels and these lymph nodes help filter out the lymph fluid, which is going to be really similar to this fluid which is in between your cells in your body. So here is a picture of our immune system. The big ones you need to focus on are the lymph nodes, the lymph vessels. The white blood cells in our body are made by the bone marrow. and specific white blood cells eventually end up in the thymus or spleen. Over here, the big yellow honeycomb looking thing, that's a lymph node. That's where the macrophages and lymphocytes are going to hang out. So that's the hotel where they're going to hang out. And the lymph vessels pull up fluid from this capillary bed here. And they're going to start filtering that through our lymphatic system. And if the lymphatic system notices that there's a pathogen, it's going to flood our lymph nodes with the phagocytes, the eaters, and it's going to sit there and munch on the bad stuff. That's why our glands get all swollen and sore. So circulating lymph fluid contains microbes, pieces of microbes, and toxins. So once again, these lymph nodes fill with macrophages which begin eating all the bad things, and this causes the tender, swollen glands in the lymph nodes in our neck and armpit, and I have some right by my ears. I think some of y'all do as well. Okay, so how does our body recognize our cells from bad cells or bad pathogens? That is by self versus non-self proteins. So every cell in our body has self-proteins on the surface which identify that cell as belonging to us. So these are like our body's fingerprints all over our cells. So when a phagocyte, or one of the white blood cells that walks around eating, finds one of these cells, it'll recognize those fingerprints as self and it won't eat it. So sometimes you've heard of people having an organ or donating an organ or receiving an organ. When they do that, the body can very easily reject that organ because it's recognized non-self. It knows that it's foreign. It knows that it doesn't belong to us, and so it'll attack it and reject that organ, and then we can't use it anymore. So doctors combat this by trying to find the closest match to our self-proteins as they possibly can. So this is normally going to come from a relative. And if they can't find a relative, they're going to sequence those self-proteins, so find out the DNA sequence and then match it to someone else. They can also use what's called immunosuppressants. These are drugs which kind of make your immune system kind of loopy for a little while. It keeps it from recognizing the non-self that's in your body, so your body has time to coat that with self. So if I get a new heart, my body is going to work on making that self. And if my immune system can be kind of out of it for a while, it gives my body time to do that. So, but this is dangerous because you can get sick with something else and your body isn't really up to fighting that since it's on these immunosuppressant drugs. Okay, so continuing, innate immunity, that's what we're going to talk about next. This is defenses that are active immediately upon infection and are the same whether or not the pathogen has been encountered. So this is what happens every time you get a cut or you get sick or anything. Your body is going to do this naturally. It doesn't matter if it's a specific illness or not. It's the same response to every single thing. Adaptive immunity is going to be a specific response to a specific illness. So, how does our body keep from getting sick? What are some natural things that we have to keep our body from letting in pathogens? Our first line of defense, we have skin, mucous membranes, and the secretions of skin and mucous membranes. Those are going to keep the bacteria from getting inside of our body. The lining of our throat, like your throat and your lungs, it has ciliated cells, which cilia are the little tiny hair-like things on the side of cells, and they can brush any dust particles or anything. They'll work on brushing those back out of your body. Our second line of defense, so we have the phagocytic white blood cells. These are the ones that walk around and eat stuff, the eaters. We have antimicrobial proteins. These will either, they walk around, or they don't walk around your body, obviously, but they kind of float around, and if they find something that's not self, so that doesn't belong to you, it will either mark it to be eaten by a phagocytic white blood cell, or it will cause the cell to self-destruct. Also, we have the inflammatory response. So this is when you cut your finger or something and the area gets kind of red and swollen and it hurts a lot. That's what your body is just naturally trying to fight the bacteria that you've let in. Right, the specific defense mechanisms, that's what we're going to talk about in adaptive immunity. These are the specific responses to certain illnesses that we have or we can get. All right, so here are some pictures. The top left is going to be a phagocyte, so one of the big eater cells, big eater white cells. So white blood cell, it's going to float around your body looking for something. You can see here it's found a bacterium, and it's going to slowly start digesting that little guy. To the right, you see a girl, she's sneezing, and below that it shows the cells, the lining of the esophagus, which is our throat and lungs. You can see the little cilia on the top, the little mohawk-looking things. Those are going to work on brushing the dust particles back out of your body once you've inhaled them. The picture on the bottom left, this is what your skin looks like at really, really high magnification. It kind of looks like scales. You can see it is actually a physical barrier to keep bacteria from getting inside. Okay, so here's just a basic map of the different things we've been talking about. You don't need to know all of these. First of all, in our eyes, we have an enzyme called lysozyme, and it works on breaking down bacterial cell walls. We have skin. So this is just a physical barrier right there on the outside. On the surface of our skin, we have these little commensal microbes. They are going to help us keep bad bacteria out, and they take care of things like eating the dead skin cells that we accumulate on the surface of our skin, so they're the good guys. In our urinary tract, our urine is very acidic, and it's going to help keep bacteria from getting in that way. It also has the lysozyme. In our digestive tract, we have really high acidity in our stomachs. We have natural bacteria in our digestive tract. That's what the natural or the normal flora is talking about. Normal flora refers to the normal colonies of bacteria we have in our bodies. Mechanical flushing, so we're constantly emptying and replenishing our digestive tract. And then our respiratory tract, this is what we talked a little bit about a minute ago. It has the cells lined with the cilia that help push the particles back out. There's also phagocytic cells in there as well that are going to help eat any little bacteria that you happen to breathe in. Alright, so now we're going to talk about innate immunity. This is the non-specific defense mechanisms. And first we're going to talk about invertebrates. So invertebrates, these are things that do not have vertebrae, they do not have a backbone. And our example is going to be an insect. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. So invertebrates rely only on innate immunity. They do not have adaptive immunity. They don't have antibodies or anything like that that's really specific. So first of all, insects have an exoskeleton, and this is a physical barrier to keep out bacteria and viruses. That exoskeleton is made out of chitin, which is what we talked about in the cell wall of fungus. Low pH, if a bacteria or a virus actually penetrates that exoskeleton somehow or it's ingested, the inside of an insect has a really low pH, so it's really acidic. They also have the lysozyme enzyme, which is going to break down the bacterial cell walls. And they have the non-specific immune cells, the phagocytes, which are capable of phagocytosis. And this is cellular ingestion and ingestion of foreign material. So these are the little eaters that run around their body and just pick up random things it doesn't recognize. So we also have recognition proteins, so the same thing we talked about earlier. These are going to bind to molecules found only in pathogens, all right? So it doesn't necessarily recognize self-proteins, but it recognizes pathogenic proteins. Okay, so innate immunity, non-specific defense mechanisms, again, and now we're going to talk about vertebrates. That's us. We have backbones. This is us, mammals, all of these things. So skin, cilia, mucus secretions, membranes, these are all things that protect the different systems of our body that are open to the environment. So like our respiratory system, that's, you breathe in, you breathe out, it's open to the environment. Digestive, think of your body as having a long tube down the middle. It goes in your mouth, comes out your bum, that whole thing. It's open to the environment. Urinary, reproductive, we all understand that. Leukocytes, this is the broad general term for white blood cells. Two different types. You have phagocytic cells. These are the macrophages and neutrophils. And these are the guys, the eaters. They are the ones walking around your body eating the things that they don't recognize. We also have NK cells. These are called natural killer cells. And these will attack cancer cells and virus-infected cells by releasing chemicals which lead to cell death. So they're going to cause these cells to self-destruct once they recognize that they've been infected. So these aren't recognizing any specific illness, they're just recognizing in general that you have an illness, and they go to work on those different pathogens that they find. Okay, so we also have defensive proteins. This is still innate immunity. So we have interferons. These are produced by viruses, which are infected by, they're produced by cells, which are infected by viruses, and it's to keep the viruses from exploding the cell and leaking and attacking other cells. So if you look at the picture, so a virus comes, it puts its DNA into the cell, and once that cell recognizes that it's been infiltrated, it's going to release these molecules, these interferon molecules, and it's like kind of an SOS. And those little molecules are going to go and signal to all the cells around the infected cell that they, there's danger, and they're going to turn on these antiviral proteins. And they're going to start defending themselves against any sort of attack that the virus might plan. We also have the complement system, 30 different kinds of inactive proteins circulating around in our blood. They're not really doing anything, they're just floating around waiting for something to happen. They can work together with other systems in our body. What we were talking about earlier, the defensive proteins that recognize the pathogenic proteins, that's what these are going to do, and those pathogenic proteins activate this system. And this complement system can lead to cell lysis, or self-destruction, and the complement system can also trigger the inflammatory response. Okay, so now, specifically the inflammatory response, this is literally means setting on fire. This is where the area, you cut your finger and it gets red and warm and swollen, kind of hurts a little bit. This will happen to any damage that you've done to yourself. So any sort of cut, poke, scrape, it turns red, it swells up a little bit. All right, so the major function of inflammatory response is to disinfect and clean the area. So that's what it's trying to do every time. Sometimes this response can be systemic. So systemic means it's happening all over your body all at once. And when you get that, you'll hear the phrase an elevated white cell count. So you've got a whole bunch of the phagocytic cells running around your body trying to contain this illness. A fever, that's when your temperature goes up, and it can be triggered by the bad toxins, or it can be a good thing triggered by the good macrophages in our body. And macrophages, if you remember, were a specific type of phagocyte cell. Systemic can also lead to septic shock, and this is a really high fever and a low blood pressure, and it can lead to death. So here's a picture of the inflammatory response. So the person punctures their skin with a pin, and that lets in a whole bunch of bacteria. When the skin is punctured, these little signaling molecules, kind of flow out towards the surrounding area. And those little signaling molecules are going to cause the blood vessels to get leaky. And when they get leaky, stuff can leak out of them, like the white blood cells. And so these white blood cells are going to go up towards the area and start munching on the bacteria that got in. And then your body's going to work on repairing that physical damage. All right, so last of all, I think this definition is going to be found a little later. I'm not going to try and read it right now. Actually, I guess I will. That way you can try and write it down. Okay, so adaptive immunity, this is only found in vertebrates. So it's only found in vertebrate animals. So invertebrates, like the insects that we talked about earlier, do not have adaptive immunity. So adaptive immunity activates only after exposure to certain pathogens, and it can amplify certain innate responses. Okay, so what this means is that if we get a specific illness that our body recognizes, it has a specific defense mechanism against that illness. And that defense mechanism might trigger or dampen some of the innate defenses that our body does naturally, or that our body does all the time. Okay, so adaptive immunity. The main pieces here, we have an antigen and an antibody. An antigen is the molecule eliciting the adaptive immune response. This is the bad guy, okay? The antigen is the bad guy. He's the one that causes all the problems. The antibody is a protein found in blood that attaches to specific antigen and counters its effects. So the antibody is what's going to go to war with the antigen. The antibodies end up attaching to the antigens, and that marks them to be eaten by the phagocytic cells, which walk around eating things. All right, so this lock and key mechanism, one antigen, a specific antigen, has a specific antibody. Any antibody can't just go and attack any antigen. It has to be a matchup. And this lock and key mechanism, where they only fit with each other, is why the immune system is so specific. It provides us with a specific response to each specific illness we encounter. All right, so on an antigen, let's start here. So you have a bacterium, and that bacterium can produce a toxin, or it can just have a piece on it, which is going to be the antigen, okay? So let's say that this is this thing, okay? So on that antigen, you're going to have a little spot, the yellow spot right here, and this is going to be what determines which antibody can attach there. Do you see how it has a specific end to it? So this one has a little block, this one's a point, and that's a little oval curve. So you can't have the curved antibody come over here and attach to this antigenic determinant because it won't fit. So antigen binding sites, so this is when we're talking about antibodies. So the antigen binding site is on the antibody, and that is what's going to determine if that antibody can fit that antigen. So only if they recognize each other will they be able to attach and then start fighting that disease. Okay, so adaptive immunity, you can have active immunity or passive adaptive immunity. Active immunity, whether you catch the flu or get a flu shot, which is a flu shot's going to be, remember, the inactive or dead pieces of that virus or bacteria, your body is still going to actively produce the little antibodies against that disease, okay? It's going to actively produce the antibodies. Passive immunity, you can receive pre-made antibodies, right? This can be from your mom's milk, like breast milk. She can usually pass that on to her baby. Before traveling, you can get shots of pre-made antibodies. With poisonous snake bites, you can inject, or you can be injected with antibodies from an animal previously attacked by that snake. So if if a snake bites a horse and then that horse develops an immunity against that snake bite, you can take antibodies from the horse and put them in yourself, and then you will be immune to that snake bite. Right, so the only problem with passive immunity is that it's temporary. It only lasts until the proteins that make up those antibodies are broken down. So once the proteins are gone, your antibodies are gone, and then your immunity is gone. Right, so lymphocytes. So these are the specialized white blood cells. All right, so white blood cells, which spend most of their time in the tissues and organs of the lymphatic system. These are the specific cells responsible for adaptive immunity. So we have two basic kinds, B cells and T cells. B cells are lymphocytes from the bone marrow, and T cells are lymphocytes from the thymus, which is a gland above the heart. To be specific, both of these originate in the bone marrow, but the T cells travel to the thymus where they are specialized into T cells. So both of these are going to end up in the lymphatic organs eventually. So B and T cells. Each B and T cell is covered with a specific antigen receptor, okay? So it will recognize only one specific type of antigen. So each B and T cell only recognize one type of antigen. That's a very important point. So if each B and T cell only recognizes one kind, you can imagine the large number of B and T cells we have in our body, since, if you think about all the different things we've come in contact with, all the different illnesses, all the different bacteria, all the different viruses, our body probably has immune cells, these B and T cells, specific to each of those illnesses. All right, so here's a picture. This is a B cell, and this is a T cell. And all of the hairy things are little receptors. So we can't zoom in enough to see, the antigenic receptor, but that's okay. You can just imagine. Each of the little hair things has a specific ending, which is going to allow it to bond or bind with only one specific type of antigen. Okay, this is the last slide. I know that there's a lot to write on this. I'm really sorry, but this is a really important point, and we'll go over it several times. This is going to be on your test big time. So we have two main types of response. We have the humoral immune response and the cell-mediated response. So the humoral immune response is kind of organized by the B cells, okay? So what happens, the B cells, initially they recognize an antigen, and in response to recognizing that antigen, so that antigen fits into their receptors, they're going to do 5 things. They secrete antibodies, okay, so remember these are going to be specific for each type of antigen. They are going to mark the bacteria for phagocytosis, so they're going to tell the body that that bacteria is bad and it needs to go away. They make plasma cells, and plasma cells are specific B cells which produce lots and lots of antibodies. So B cells produce a couple, but plasma cells mass produce it. It's also going to make memory cells for long-term, memory. Okay, so a memory cell is going to be what sticks around in your body, and it's going to remember that specific antigen until next time you get it. So the last thing it's going to do, it's going to activate T helper cells for the cell-mediated response. So the humoral response can activate the cell-mediated response, and we're going to see that the cell-mediated response can activate the humoral immune response. So they're both going to kind of work together and activate each other over and over and over again. Big thing with the humoral immune response, it protects against bacteria and viruses in the body fluid. Okay, so it's going to be the viruses and bacteria that haven't entered your cells yet. They're in the lymph fluid or the interstitial cell fluid, so the fluid that's in between your cells, or it hasn't really gotten there yet. All right, so cell-mediated response. This is going to be mediated by the helper T cells. So it's going to be controlled by the helper Ts. The helper Ts respond to antigens on cells, surfaces. That's a little bit hard to understand. So here's our cell, and it has little self proteins. It gets infected by a bacterium, and it's going to attach antigens, this bacterium's antigens, on its self proteins. And that is what the helper T cell is going to recognize. Okay, so once it's recognized those antigens, it's going to trigger the inflammatory response. So what we talked about earlier, the area is going to get red, it's going to get swollen, it's going to be sore. It activates more phagocytes. It activates what are called cytotoxic T cells, and these are going to go and work on attacking cells that have been infected. It also makes T memory cells for memory. So B cells have specific memory cells, and T cells have specific memory cells. And then lastly, it's also going to activate the B cells for the humoral response. So this is going to happen back and forth. They help each other out. So a cell-mediated response, it battles pathogens already in our cells. So the cells that have already been infected are going to activate the helper T cells, which is in turn going to activate the cell-mediated response. Okay, that's it. You did good. Thank you very much.